Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet.
This review is brought to you in part by Dean's Hobby Stop in Owasso, Michigan. Dean's has one of the Midwest's largest selections of used kits at great prices. They also feature new kits and supplies as well. Call Dean's to get their mail order list featuring hundreds of vintage kits, or check their website for great deals on both new and classic models. This review covers the 1969 Cougar Eliminator. It's a 125 kit from AMT, number 6960. Now, Mercury mixed some elegant styling to raw power and produced the Eliminator models back in 1969 and 70 on the Mustang platform. This version included the race-proven Boss 302 Ford power plant. It's near and dear to me because I used to drive one myself back in 1969. Now, the 69 Cougar kits were first tooled up in 68 and reboxed a few times during the period, including this 1991 release of the Eliminator and a more recent reissue of AMT number 912 with an orange car on the box. It's a single-purpose kit with about 85 pieces, molded in white, clear, and chrome, with clear red pieces branded vinyl tires, a metal axle, and water slide decals. The kit retains some of the molding technology issues from the 60s, which would require extra work for the contest builder. Most of the kit goes together pretty easily if you know where the parts go. Unfortunately, the instructions don't always show you that, but we will. Now, when the kit is finished, it's about 7 3/4 inches long, 3 inches wide, and 1.5 inches tall. And, I hear Newt tapping on the glass. He's our program director, and it looks like he's got something he wants to add here. What is it, Newt?
This kit still looks pretty good today, and you said you used to drive one, so was it as fast as it looks?
It sure was, Newt, but mine had the 390 cubic inch Ford engine, so it was more suited for drag racing than Trans Am style racing. Still, it was a lot of fun to drive, and it looked awesome on the road. Here are the contents of the kit, and as you can see, the parts are pretty cleanly molded. There's not much flash. But as I mentioned, it does suffer from ejector pin marks and parting lines that are part of the early molding experience. The clear stuff is nice and clear. The vinyl tires are nice. They even have sidewall branding on them that you can highlight. And everything was actually molded pretty well. It's just with the instructions and execution that needs some work. Now, we'll be using mostly liquid cement, but sometimes super glue and clear glue for the windows. And please remember to heed the manufacturer's safety and use guidelines when using any of the products that you hear or see in the room. We see the decals here, and it comes with the two options that were available for the stripes. Now, you'll need plenty of warm water to put these into position, and then smooth them out with a soft Kleenex or cloth to keep them straight and smooth. You may need a little setting solution around the door panels to get them to conform to that. As a word of caution, I bought this kit used, so the first thing I did was print out the instructions and inventory all the parts to make sure it was all there. The only thing missing were cross braces from the hood area, but everything else was there. And the next thing I do then is color code all of the parts to determine which colors are used for processing the finishes on the model. I just use some ink pens to determine that, and then I segregate the parts later on and paint them generally all at one time. Also, note through the sequence that I don't always follow the instructions as they're written step by step. For purposes of finishing and painting, sometimes you just can't do that. So you see here the body panels, and those things will be cleaned up and finished first after they're primed. As you see here, the hood scoop has no locating points. You merely have to eye it up and put it into position using some measurement. And I marked the center line, and then I put the hood scoop where it would go, and then kind of outlined that with pencil so that I knew exactly where to position it, and glued it into position. Now, at the lower portion, you see some circles, and those are demonstrating the hood pins which are on the hood. But my car didn't have hood pins, although it was an option, I believe. So I removed them with some sandpaper. And as you see, if you turn the hood over, there are 4 ejector pin marks right in an area that you would see, and also a depression that comes from the Street Machine kit. And that would need to be filled in and retextured if you're going to make a contest model out of it. Now you're going to see here a pencil mark where the parting line goes all the way around the top and sides of the mirror, the door mirrors. So you'll need to sand those off smooth. And also there's only about 1/64 of an inch of mounting surface here to put the mirrors onto the doors. So what I do is use a pin vise, and I cut a little piece of metal or something from a small diameter pin or some construction plastic, and put some mounting posts in there, and later on we'll drill the holes in the car door to receive these for a perfectly placed mount. And as you can see here, the model that was built for the box art, the builder who put that together didn't even try it. So it can be an issue if you don't have a good place to position your parts. And as you can see here, we're continuing with all the peripheral pieces that will need to be body colored, because we want to paint them all at the same time to get the same exact shade on all the pieces. So for the rear spoiler, I went ahead and I built the thing upside down, as you can see, with the mounting posts attached to it. Now pay attention to the orientation, and you'll see that more clearly in subsequent photos. The body is pretty clean, and it's nicely proportioned to the original, but you see the pencil marks along the fender edges and up over the ridge, the drip rail there. And there's also some braces that will need to be addressed, so those will have to be cut out. Originally there should have been braces there in the hood area too, engine bay area, so you'll have to deal with those and clean those areas up with a scraper and some fine sandpaper, and take care of the parting lines and the sprue point attachments there. And now here you see what I mean about the hood. You see that outlining around those posts there. Now those are supposed to stay. They will keep the hood up in position, and also you'll have to deal with those ejector pin marks because they'll still show even outside of being partially covered up by those hood stays. A quick look at the interior roof shows some large pin marks, but basically those are going to get covered up by your window glass unless you section that. The next item is to select color, and I used the plastic spoon test. I painted it with some white primer, which we'll use on the parts, and then I sprayed it with 4 different colors that I had in orange. I ended up liking the competition orange paint from Tester's Best. In addition to the hood, the spoiler, and the mirrors, we're also going to paint the front stone pan there. That's the part that will nestle up underneath the grill and bumper. With the underside of the hood painted body color, I'm going to tape it into position, and then I'm also going to take some about 40 thousandths off the edges, the back and the sides, to make sure that it fits after paint. And then I'm going to cover that up completely so it doesn't get resprayed. And we give a light coat of gray primer, light gray primer, and then follow that up with a coat of white primer and let that dry in anticipation of color coats. Now we'll start standard construction with the engine, and it's very nicely detailed. You can see inside the heads have pistons and sections and valves on the other side. It's a nicely detailed Boss 302 engine, and we're going to paint the aft section there, transmission, a aluminum color. And then the one problem I had was the sprue attachment point for my fan broke off a piece of the fan, so we'll have to repair that. So to fix my missing piece there, I just cut a piece of 5/1000 sheet stock, about the same width as the end of the fan, and then I glued it into position with some super glue on the back side. The next thing I did was then trim it off so that it was the right shape on the end, and then I filled it in with some putty, smoothed it off, and then painted it gloss black for a final repair. The next thing that I did was start to examine the chassis, because we're going to have to get that painted and then set it aside to dry for construction, because the motor goes in there. Next, I put the front and back halves of the seats together. They're pretty nicely detailed, but they also have a large, parting line where the parts go together there, so you have to smooth those over. And also, there's quite a pronounced break, a sharp break on the dash board. That's not supposed to be there. It's kind of like flash, but just scrape that off and smooth it out. Next, I turn my attention to the wheel assemblies, and as you can see here, the chrome on the wheels are actually they're pretty thin all over the model kit. If you scrape it with your thumb, it's liable to peel off. So I nipped these off of the trees and found that there were some chrome missing from the edges of the rims. So I went ahead and used the Molotow chrome pen to kind of clean those up and make them look more presentable. The finishing of the wheels is kind of important because they really set off the model. Now I went ahead, because the letters were so highly raised on the sidewalls, I used a dry brush technique with a tapered, or I should say a round toothpick. Just get a little paint on there and roll it over these script letters, and they'll highlight real nicely. Now, the wheel backs were painted silver, and then inside the wheel, where the holes are all around on the inside portion there, that part was not chrome. It was kind of a steel color, so I went ahead and I painted that section with some flat paint to take the shine off, to emulate that sheen and color that was on the original car. The wheels assembled nicely. You just put the backs and the front portions of the wheels together, making sure that the mag side is on the side that you've highlighted the script, and I glued them together with a little of that Bob Smith tire glue. There's a bit of an exaggerated tread area right in the center of the tires longitudinally, but if you scuff the tires up, they look pretty realistic. And now, with some of those items set aside to dry, we can turn our attention back to the engine. And here you see just put together the basic block with the heads, the front, and the oil pan, and painted that a Ford blue. Now paint the exhausts and the exhaust pipes steel colored, and the mufflers there, by the way, will be a aluminum, and those look best when sprayed. So I sprayed those first, then painted the rest of the pipes and the exhaust. I also added some blush rust to the exhaust, because after they come out of the factory, it only takes about a week for that to happen. Here you see the assembled engine, and just follow along with the instructions, and if you don't have them, they're located at the end of the review here, so you can stop that video at that point and use it as a guide. But the engine goes together very nicely, actually, and some of the parts, the alternator and the some of the pieces that are called anodized aluminum, like the valve covers, get sprayed with some flat clear and dried. And then when you glue chrome parts on, you have to scrape the glue or the chrome off from the gluing surface, or it won't stick. But you can see here the various colors and things that were applied. There's also a couple of decals. The one on the valve covers, the Boss 302 emblem, and on top of the air cleaner is a 302 engine decal too. And you see also that pipe, that recirculation pipe that extends up towards the snorkel on the air cleaner. There's no bottom of the snorkel on the real one. There's a bottom of that, and this is ported right inside a pipe fitting, but not on the model. It's hard to see from the top anyway. And of course the transmission and the linkage, they're all attached at the back there, and then I went over that later with a little bit of black wash to bring out some of the highlights. At step 6 now, we're going to paint the entire chassis a semi-gloss black, and I painted the gas tank steel color with a little rust blush on it. The springs and suspension parts are gloss black, and you see the rusty exhaust pipes there, along with a rusty drive shaft. Also, we're going to make sure that the rear axle will go through that assembly, that rear axle assembly. Just make sure, and if not, use a small drill to clean it out. Now there's pins up front that go through some king pins that will be used to retain the front wheels. Just as a reminder, you see some white patches on the chassis, and also on the related suspension parts, and the center cross member will do the same thing for that. You have to take and scratch the paint off to get good adhesion, and it's really important on the suspension parts. At this point, we're going to gather up our wheel assemblies that should be fully dried. Now, the glue points for the front suspension aren't really fully shown, but you can see here that those forward rods, they extend into the V shape there, and they kind of fit into a couple notches there, and that'll kind of guide you as to where the rest of the unit goes. You're going to assemble that by sandwiching the kingpins into position, and make sure that you have your wheel axle stubs sticking out from the inside there, and then you just glue the whole assembly down onto the chassis, and then you can add your tires and wheels after they have set. It's time to glue the engine into position, and you can see the top arrow here indicates a post where there's also a notch at the back of the transmission, and then there's one right underneath on the oil pan that fits into a crossbar there. And so put that into place and make sure that it's vertical, standing straight up and down. You are also going to want to scratch off a little bit of the paint on that bumper that's on top of the inner fender wells. That is where you're going to glue the lower body, or the body, to the lower chassis. That and some posts at the. At step 7 in the instructions, we're going to run into what I call over-engineering. There was a period of time when the makers of models wanted to duplicate the way parts were actually built by the car companies, and so they thought that they should go together in the same fashion, except that the car companies use 3/4 inch bolts. You're going to use about 20 thousandths circle here to try and assemble pieces and hold them together with glue. Anyway, most of the rear springs like this were then later just molded onto the rear axle. But here you're going to try and hang it and glue it at the same time. So we're going to use some slow setting glue to put the shock absorbers into place. And you see that the surfaces have been prepped for the rear springs, and it's not real clear here, but there are some small holes at the back by the gas tank where those springs are located, and then they just kind of sidle up into some notches in the front there just past the springs. Now you can set the rear axle housing into place there along with the drive shaft. Just put it into position, and we're going to use some super glue to glue the springs into place so that they stay. Now, once that's attached, you can put a little slow setting or epoxy type glue on the axle housing that mates to the springs, and then lift it up towards the springs there until it sets, just making sure that drive shaft is pointed into the engine that's already been mounted in front. And now just squeeze the tires onto the rear axles after it's fully set, and you can see that we have a pretty good start on our chassis. Now we're going to jump back to step 6 and install the exhaust. And I knew that they got in the way trying to install the rear housing assembly, etc. So I had elected to go ahead and section them. That's right, I cut off the rear exhaust pipe section from the mufflers, and I glued those into position. You can see the area scratched off there near the rear wheel. that shows, where I would glue the mufflers into place. And also connected those to the engine exhaust manifold. At the back, just before the end of the car, and aside from the gas tanks there, I added a little post to mount my exhaust pipes on. I'm just going to glue them on to those posts to give them a little standoff, and then snake the pipes underneath the rear axle and glue them with a little slow setting glue to the mufflers. Now, the reason I had to add those little standoffs beside the gas tank is because that the mounting posts that are shown in the instructions do not exist. They're not on the exhaust pipes. So you also notice that with the exhaust pipes connected to the exhaust manifolds at the engine, which are in place, they have to be because that's where the posts on the motor go, then one muffler is further ahead than the other. So that's an issue. If you're building a contest model, note that the exhaust crossover pipe there has to connect to the other side. Also note that the red lines here will indicate where you'll have to move the muffler and exhaust pipes. You'd have to cut it off, of course, in front of the driver's side muffler to shorten up that distance, and then you'd have to extend the exhaust pipe going out the rear from the driver's side to extend into the muffler in a new place. Now we're going to turn to the interior, and I went to Best Model Car Parts and got some gauges for the dashboard. They sell these gauges. You just cut them out and then you apply them to a dashboard, and they look very realistic. And you can, just use some white glue or some slow setting glue, depending on what you want to do. And you see here they were applied to the dashboard, along with some walnut textured or looking paint behind the exhaust IP gauges and the glove compartment there. The interior bucket is molded as one piece, so it's very difficult to detail the sidewalls, side panels. I used a little chrome pen on the door handles and cranks, but the interior itself has some large ejector pins that are right on invisible sections of the floor, and it's textured. So what I did was use some embossing powder and then laid down a little bit of white glue and poured the embossing powder over those areas that are not underneath the front seats to give it a little more realistic look and hide those ejector pin marks. So the seats are painted semi-gloss black to match the rest of the interior and dashboard, and the steering column is the same, except that it has a walnut colored face to it on top of the ribs and spokes and wheel. So that gets painted a walnut. Also, you note the shifter there, the boot is flat black, and they would have you paint the handle grip there a gloss black, but in my vehicles, the ones that I saw, it was just kind of an anodized aluminum or steel color. So there's your interior. After all is said and done, it actually still looks pretty nice. I painted the bottom, the tunnel there, and the forward portion the same semi-gloss black as the top, just in case it shows up through the bottom of the car. And with a little bit of the walnut detailing, it's a little more dressy than your Mustang counterpart. With the body parts fully cured and dried, now we can start working with the body for some detailing. And so the first thing we're going to do is add some chrome trim to the windshield and the backlight, and that's done in this case with some gold metal foil, bare metal foil I should say, and it has a very realistic look if it's done well. I always just scribe a little channel around those windows before I apply the foil so that I've got something for the knife to guide in and get a nice clean look around your detailing. Also, the windshield wipers there are detailed just the same, and also the bezels for the side marker lights need to be detailed with some chrome foil. So it's often overlooked, but the side marker lights, they really add distinction to your car model. And also, I used a little dry, paint dry brushing technique, once again with the tapered toothpick, to add script chrome to those parts, both the rear there above the bezels and up in front, just in front of the hood there on the driver's side. With a little bit of clear red for the rear marker lights and the clear amber for the front marker lights, you can really make that look nice. Also, you note the there's a little rocker panel trim there that gets foiled, and I went around the window trim with the chrome pen to give the drip edge there a chrome touch too. There are not too many decals for this model, but the ones that are there are pretty challenging. These long, thin stripes can be difficult to apply. For that, use plenty of warm water. Make sure that you get the thing into position by pulling the strip off of it lengthwise and then keeping it in place as close as you can. And then you can basically move it around with a little paintbrush to get it into position precisely before you wipe it off smooth with a nice cloth or a Kleenex. And now we're at step 10 of the assembly, and we've got the interior that's all complete. Now the firewall was painted with semi-gloss black and detailed according to the instructions there. Also note that the windshield wiper rubber portion of that blade was, I used a Sharpie marker on that. And we're going to get the windows staged up along with the rear view mirror. The instructions are very vague on this section for putting the interior and the firewall into place. Note that at the back, the black arrow there, the taper that's at the very end of the package shelf will fit right up to the end of the body trunk area. So I simply glued it there in position with some super glue. And then the rest of the body, of course, will just rest in place. And note too that the firewall has got some standoffs on it, but there's no receivers or anything. So simply glue that to the body and the top of the dash end there, as well as against the body floor panels. The red arrow up front and the white spots there, that's paint removed so that you can glue the chassis to the body. To make the chassis to the body, you're going to look for some posts and receivers at the back end. Now, they don't really fit together. I had to open up the receivers posts there so that the little pegs would fit into them, and even trim them off a little bit so that they would bottom out for a good gluing surface. But that's where you're going to glue the rear of the chassis together to the body. And up front, of course, we talked about at the tops of the fenders, inner fender wells have that spot where you can glue that to the underside of the fenders in the body. And it actually comes out pretty nice when you know where to put them. We'll take care of some engine bay details now, starting with the battery, which you paint flat black, and then simply sand off or scrape off the posts and the caps there to give it a good white surface for your Sharpie marker. I used a red marker here to highlight the caps, and then the battery has posts on it. Now there are kits for these batteries to include all the wiring, etc., but for this model we're just going to install it in place. Well, the model kit comes with an upper radiator hose, no lower one, so you're only going to get half efficiency. But nonetheless, I had to modify the end of it there a little bit so that it would fit into the connection on the upper radiator. And now you see here the lower white arrow shows the battery installed. You're better off to glue that to the radiator wall before you install that. And also I detailed that with a steel radiator cap. The radiator wall itself fits into a couple of notches that are on the bottom side of the fenders. So look for those notches and just put that into position and make sure that it's straight up and down. Then the top arrow here indicates where the upper radiator hose is glued to the motor and to the radiator. At step 13, we're going to add the rear end pieces, including the spoiler and the license plate, which is kind of curious in itself because the coloration is more like a 1973 Michigan plate. But we're going to use it because it's pretty neat. And just be sure to remove the chrome from the top back ridge of the bumper so you can glue that to the upper lip or lower lip on the trunk. And then we're going to just add the red turn signals there. And note that there's 2 pegs on each side, so they can be just located there inside the bumper, and they fit very nicely. So I just used a little clear glue and glue those posts into the receivers in the bumper. Also, you just mount your spoiler, the rear airfoil there, onto the trunk and the holes located. And so here is the assembly at the rear end, and notice those easy mounting posts and receivers there in the rear bumper for the taillights are quite visible. So if you're going to make a contest model, you'll want to fill in those holes and then repaint that or chrome that area and cut the posts off of the turn signals on the back side. You still may see a shadow of them, but they won't be so dark. And then you could even just as well cover the back side with some chrome too to try and cut down on that effect. And that said, it's a pretty nice looking configuration of the Cougar at the back end there. We can give that front grille a little blacked out treatment there. It's pretty well segregated from the outer bumper chrome, and you can add varying amounts of black wash to that. Keeping in mind that on the original car you could still see the chrome edges of the raised portions of the horizontal grille ribs there. Also add some clear amber to the parking lights below to get that a nice looking lighted effect. At this stage we can add the mirrors and the front end pieces here, and for Michigan in 1969 we used both plates, front and back. Now we're going to just glue the mirror blanks into the mirrors, of course, for the glass, and then go ahead and add a little bit of glue to the posts and put those into, we're going to drill some holes for that to put those into. But right now, remember to scrape the chrome and install the front grille into the front end. While the glue sets on the front bumper grille, we're going to drill those holes, appropriate place there on the top of the fender wells, and then we're going to drop those mirrors in with a little drop of glue on the post as we discussed, and here's what they look like when you're done. Now we're up against another very tricky part for this build. The front valance fits just over the parking lights there on the below the front bumper and kind of nestles up to them, but it attaches at the edges of the fender wells, and there's no mounting ribs of any kind, no positioning, so you really just kind of have to eye it up there to put that into place. So scrape the glue off the edges, and then I used a couple of supporting popsicle sticks to keep it up in the air while it was drying in place. It would be possible to mock this all up and glue it into position before you paint the body, and then finish it off a little bit nicer there at the connection points between the valance and the fender well edges. Now, to make matters more interesting, the front valance, I should say the front air dam, this chin spoiler as they call it, doesn't really fit well in the first place, but there's no mounting points, tabs, or anything, no receivers, etc. So you're just going to scratch some of the paint off of mating surfaces you see right there just before the chassis. I got a little white mark and out on the edges, and you're going to glue that into place. I'd use some really fast setting glue and just put that into position the best that you can, making sure it's kind of equidistant and in the center of the roll pan there. This is all you have left from this single purpose kit left over for parts. Actually, there's no parts, just a few decals, including, curiously, a fan shroud decal, but there's no fan shroud. So rather than leave it hanging midair, I just left it off. Well, there you have it. After all is said and done, It really looks great. Almost as good as the car I used to drive. But nonetheless, if you pay attention to my appropriate fixes and adjustments, you can build this model successfully and have it come out looking very nice. And after all, that's the whole idea. You're looking for subject matter, and that's the king. So if you just have some patience and do a little test fitting, you can come up with a stellar looking model for your shelf. So if I were you, I'd find one, buy it, and put it on my shelf. Well, we hope you like this premium step-by-step model kit review. And so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking on the icon in the lower right of any of our reviews. And you can find us on Facebook or our website, rightonreplicas.com. Thanks.